Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for that nice introduction. Before I get started, I do want to thank Janice. Janice and I, as she mentioned, we worked at a PR agency together a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And we were laughing about this. We had dinner last night. We were laughing about this. In those days, we had typewriters. There were no computers. And we manually stuffed press releases, and we actually mailed them out. So that's how much the industry's changed. But all through that time, I've always admired Janice. She's a fantastic PR professional and a great person. So when she called and said, would you be willing to come north? And I don't come north very often. I don't go south very often. Now that I'm retired, I don't like to drive, to be honest with you. So, but it's a pleasure to do this. And I often speak to college classes, and I often speak to professional organizations, because speech writing is a very important part of public relations, and there's not a lot that's understood about it, and a lot of people are afraid of it, and we want to get over that. So I'm happy to speak about speech writing, because it's probably one of the most misunderstood areas of PR, but it's also one of the most lucrative. So listen carefully, because it may help you down the road at some point in time. You know, your leaders wisely asked me to answer 4 questions in the brief time that I have here. Why speeches are still an important part of PR? What's the best way to structure and write a speech? How to prepare for delivery of a speech from novice to expert? And finally, what type of information to include into a speech pitch? That's a lot to cover in about 15 minutes. So I'm going to go quickly, but I have given you a packet of background information that you can refer to some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, and afterwards. These are great tools that will help you if you ever get called upon to do speech writing. So let's start with that first question, and that why are speeches and speech writing still an important part of PR? I mean, look, we're in the world of social media. I mean, there's a zillion social media outlets. Everybody has a platform today. Why would speeches, that old-fashioned thing called speeches that they did back in the Roman and Greek times, be important today? Why? So just throw out a couple of ideas. I want to find out where you're at on speeches, why you think it might still be important today. Any ideas? Any quick questions? That's right. Well, that's right. They can video you, and that's right. And if you say something embarrassing, they can send it to the TMZ, and you're really in trouble. But anything else? Anything else? Why you think it might be important? Source of quotes. Yeah. Yeah. Lots of times speeches have some really good sound bites in them, and so they're really a good place to get sound bites and things like that. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All good ideas. Let me read something that I found recently that I think is the best description on why speeches are important today. And it says, speech and spoken words have always played a big role in the individual and collective lives of people. Wars have been won, blood has been shed, men have sacrificed their lives, and peace agreements have been made because of the magic words of a few who knew how to give life to their words. And this is one thing that hasn't changed with the development of various technologies. We are yet to see something as powerful as a speech that influences the minds and thoughts of the whole of mankind. Okay? Pretty strong statement. If you still need convincing, in a recent article, Michael Mazzari, who's the VP of Caesars Entertainment, Caesars Hotel and a bunch of other, he said, quote, no matter what industry we work in, we're all in the people business. Regardless of how tech-savvy you may be, face-to-face meetings are still the most effective way to capture the attention of participants, engage them in conversation, and drive productive collaboration. Why is being live so important? Because, Massari notes, without the ability to read body language, a critical form of communication, we miss crucial elements to conversations that can positively or negatively impact a business. Okay? When we communicate in person, there's a lot of cues that we give that you don't see on the phone or in email or even on video sometimes. And that communicates a lot more than what's the words. I hate to say that because I'm a speechwriter, I get paid for words. But there's so much that goes into body language, into tone of voice, into facial expressions, and if you can't see somebody face to face, you don't get that. So it's critically important to make a connection. So even in these days of exponential growth of social media, it's still a basic human need to talk to people face to face and make a connection with them. And until you can look somebody in the eyes, you're really not making that connection. So speech writing and speeches are very important today. Why is this important to you? Because at some point in your career, you're probably called on to get involved, run, work with, do something in terms of speeches. And instead of running for the hills like a lot of PR people do, because it's kind of a scary topic, we're going to talk about some ways that you can, get through that time period, and you might enjoy it, and you might find a whole new career in PR. So that takes us to question number 2. What's the best way to structure and write a speech? It's one thing to deliver it, another thing to write it. So let's talk about that. So if you go to the first page in your packet that I gave you, there's actually 10 top tips, but because of time, I'm going to go through 5, but I urge you to read the rest of it when you can. So number 1 is know your audience and speak to their interests, not your own. This is important not only in speech writing, but in any writing you do. The problem with most speeches is that whoever the speaker is, they have a preset idea of what they want to tell you. What they want to tell you. That's their agenda. It's not your agenda as the audience. You need to turn that around. If you want to be successful, not only at speech writing, but in any writing, you need to find out as much as you can about the audience, okay? The more you find about their needs, their wants, their desires, what they would like, and the more you can weave your message into what they want to hear, the more successful you're going to be. So the first step is find everything that you can about that audience. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with a great writing coach by the name of Ann Wiley. She's out of Portland, but she does seminars all around. Do you know Ann? Has anybody taken an Ann Wiley? Is she fantastic or what? She has free newsletters. There's in the back page of your thing, you don't have to write it down, because in the back page I've got a source sheet, and you can find. I urge you to go to her website and sign up for her weekly writing. She's fabulous, and if you ever get a chance to go see her, go see her. She came up with a kind of a clever way of this frame of network of always paying their attention. It's called WIIFM. Does anybody know what that means? Anybody? Okay, it's real simple. What's in it for me? Pretty tricky, huh? What's in it for me? I call it radio station WIIFM. If you're going to do any writing, go to radio station. First thing you want to do is go to radio station WIIFM. You want to find out what the audience wants to hear, and then create your message to do that. If you do that, you will be highly successful. If you don't do that, you're going to be just like most other speakers, and you don't want to do that. Number 2, create a strategic outline to structure and think through a speech before you start writing. I was fortunate early in my career at Toyota. I met a guy by the name of Mark S. Walton. Mark was a founding correspondent for CNN News back in the 1980s. Everybody know what CNN is? Is that still relevant? I don't know. Anyway, he not only was a founding correspondent, he actually was their White House correspondent for 4 or 5 years, won the Peabody Award, a high journalism, broadcast journalism, brilliant communicator. He came to speak to some Toyota people on that, and I struck up a friendship with him, and he was writing this book. I urge you to get this book. It absolutely changed my life. In this, it's called Generating Buy-in, Mastering the Language of Leadership. What Mark did is he observed leaders, everybody from Reagan to whoever the other presidents were, but Reagan was one of the key ones when he was a correspondent. And then he studied a lot of leaders throughout history, and he came up with some basic principles on how leaders were successful in communicating. He developed sort of a basic outline for key messages for leaders. I took that outline, and I'm going to share that with you in a few minutes, and I made that more for kind of the day-to-day business that you and I are in. I'm going to share that with you in a minute. But, I got to keep this so we'll get back to that in a minute. Number 3, never include more than 3 messages in a speech. It's called the rule of 3. And rather than try to explain it to you, Mark does a fantastic job of explaining. I'm going to read a little excerpt here. No one really knows how or why the rule came to be. What can be established is that the practice of leveraging the rule of communicating in 3s to enhance audience reception, retention, and recall dates at least to the Greek mythologists in the 8th century BC. Whatever the case, from that point forward, our collective consciousness has been saturated with 3s. Faith, hope, charity, body, mind, spirit, duty, honor, country, past, present, future, red, white, and blue, ready, aim, fire, on your mark, get set, go. I tell you, if you start thinking about 3s and watch for them, they're everywhere, and there's a certain cadence to it. So, fast forward to the 21st century. How do you feel when someone makes a speech with 14 key points you're supposed to remember, tries to sell you 11 things about their product, wants you to follow a 10-step process? It's no wonder they continue to try. Audience research shows that most folks begin to lock their mental gates at the very thought of having to listen to let alone remember a litany of factoids. But 3 ideas, 3 steps, 3 reasons. For this, the mind's portal opens. We feel an immediate sense of release, and if we're interested in the topic, it becomes easy, even enjoyable to focus. That's the ancient rule of 3 at work in today's overstressed, overcommunicated environment. And it's an axiom that many of the most savvy leaders, marketers, and organizations have taken to heart. 3 messages. Remember that. It is a key. So no more than 3 messages, because especially in a speech, because when you deliver a speech, your words, it's vapor, right? You can't go back, unless you're very direct and very clear. Somebody's confused, they can't go back and reread it like you can in printed, right? You can go back, if you're reading a book and you don't understand something, you go back and reread it until you figure it out. But in a speech, you can't do that, it's gone, it's vaporized. So you need to be very direct, you need to be very focused on your 3 messages. Number 4, tell interesting stories that emphasize key points. They add color and life to speeches and are remembered best. Make sure to connect your stories to the points. And then I'm going to talk about Ann Wiley again here in a minute. Several things happen when you tell a story. What happens is you become, or the speaker becomes more animated. They become more real, they become more authentic, they become more interesting, they become more fun, they become more relatable. More importantly, they start painting a picture in your mind. We have a brain that has 2 sides, right? A creative side and a logical side, or vice versa. I can't never remember how that is. But the story appeals to the creative side, and the point you're trying to make, the logical side, right? So chances are, if they remember the story and you connect it to a point, they're going to remember the point. So as Ann Wiley says, if you have a good story, find a good point. If you have a good point, find a good story. So connect them. It's not enough to just tell a story. One time at Toyota, we had a guy from Southwest come in and speak, told great stories, but he never connected them to a point. So you had all these great stories, but you weren't sure exactly when he was done what he was talking about, other than, it was kind of some inside baseball from Southwest. So make sure to connect your stories to points. A good speech is about a brighter future. Again, this is from Mark Walton. If you want to be a good speaker, or if you want to help somebody be a good speaker, they have to present a plan for a positive future for the audience. So wherever that audience is today, you talk about how they can have a brighter future, okay? We all want to follow leaders that have a plan to get us to the promised land. You don't want to follow a leader that says, oh, things are tough. If we just hang together, maybe they'll get better. You don't want to do that. You want to go, the person comes in, I know things are tough. We're going to have to work hard. I've got a plan. If we all work the plan, we're going to make it to the promised land. Who do you want to follow? You want to follow the person who's got the plan, got the direction, understands what your needs are, and knows what you want in the future. Again, this goes back to the understanding your audience. So always, always, a speech is about a brighter future. Okay, if you do that, there. All right, let's move on to number 3. And we're going to go back to the strategy sheet that I developed. So if you go to the next page, it's a blank one. It says event program at the top, buy-in objective. This is based on Mark Walton theme in his book, but this is the one that I use day to day. And I kept everything to 1 page, and it's amazing when you work with executives and you take 1-page strategy sheet in, they love it. They really love it because they don't have time and they want to see the whole thing laid out, and this will do it. So buy-in objective, that's what you're trying to get as a speaker, or your speaker's trying to get. But most importantly, target audience, their needs, wants, and goals, WIIFM. Find out what their needs are, their wants, their goals, what a bright future would be for them. Strategic storyline is this story of a positive future for the audience. And many times you're going to write that after you develop the rest of the strategy sheet. It may not be immediately. Maybe it'll pop out right away. But scene setter is basically a good opening. And then how many messages? How many targeted messages do we have? 1, 2, 3. 3 targeted messages. 3 things I want to talk about today. Ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. Right? Then you say, let's start with number 1. Boom, 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 boom. And you, with those targeted messages, you tell stories, data, business experience, anything that sort of builds on your case for that particular targeted message. At the end, you have a close and call to action. Every speech needs a close. You don't want to just say, okay, it's so awkward. We've all been there where a speaker just sort of stops and you kind of go, is this the end? Do I clap? Do I take out my iPhone? What do I do? So you want to make sure that you close the loop. So basically what you do is you say, we've talked about these 3 things, and in general terms, if we work together and we make this happen, we're going to have a bright future for ourselves and our families, or whatever it happens to be, whatever the bright future is, right? That's the call to action. The call to action is, here's what we've talked about, here's what we need to do, let's do it, right? That's the call to action. Nike found out, let's do it, just do it. The next page is basically, I thought it would be helpful for you. This was a speech that I won a lot of awards with. This is an actual working one that I created in 2007 for a big conference in Michigan. And it'll give you an idea what it looks like when it's filled out. All right. Each situation is a little bit different. Sometimes you may start with one and change it, but this is what I will take into the executive and say, here's what we're going to talk about in Michigan, right? And so let's move on. So that's basically how the best way to structure and write a speech. So moving on to question number 3, how to prepare for delivery of speech from novice to expert. I will tell you that the first 6 would be the novice, and anything beyond that is probably expert, okay, in general terms. So how to prepare for delivery of speech. Always do your audience research. Have I heard this before? WIIFM. First thing you do, what's going on with the audience? What's going on with the audience? Draft your one-page strategy sheet, right? One-page strategy sheet. Meet with your speaker and discuss and get sign-off on the strategy sheet or outline. Okay? Now, sometimes I'd go in and they would say, let's make number 3 number 1, or number 1 number 2, or let's do this instead of that. But you basically, that's what you're negotiating with what you're going to write about, right? And they like it because they've got the whole strategy mapped out. One page. They don't have to deal with 10 pages. One page. Then when you get sign-off, you write your first draft and follow the top 10 tips, which you look at the other 5, then edit, read out loud, edit, read out loud, edit, read out loud, repeat, repeat, repeat. So why do you read out loud? Any ideas why we read out loud? We read out loud because you're going to catch things that you wouldn't when you're reading with your mind. One of the things you're going to catch is when the sentence is too long, right? Because you're going to run out of breath. If you're going to run out of breath, so is your speaker. So you want to catch that. You want to catch timing. You want to catch words that are hard to say in groups. So once you've done that and you've edited really tight, you go and you set up a meeting to have your speaker read through it. They have to read through it out loud, right? They can do it at a desk. They don't have to do it standing up, but they read it through, and you find out how the timing is overall, right? You find out also any words that they can't say in a row. It's funny how you may be able to do it, but they can't. And also you want to know if sentences are too long, too short, difficult words, transitions between. If you want a smooth speech, you want to make sure you're taking the audience carefully to the next step. You want to signal that, right, with your words. Then, who's ever doing the speech, number 6, practice, 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 right? Practice. Like anything else, if you practice, you're going to get better, and preferably with videotape. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate to see myself on videotape, and there they are, they're videotaping. So I may not look at it. But I will tell you that when you videotape your speaker, you videotape yourself giving the speech, you will find out so many things that are different than what you had in your mind. And I once took a class where we had, it was on presentations, and you were telling a fairy tale story, and they kept telling you to do bigger gestures, and you felt like a buffoon. You felt silly. You look at the tape and it looks great. And you're going, in my mind, I thought I was going crazy, and on the tape it looks wonderful. You're going, hey, Jim Henson, here I am. So basically, use videotape when you can, and not all speakers will do that, so don't tear yourself up, but get them to practice, practice, practice. And what was interesting about that is the Japanese executives I worked with, if I told them to go home and practice it 30 times, they would go home and practice it 30 times, and you would see the difference. Most of the American speakers, the English speakers, they would maybe practice it 2 or 3 times, unless they were naturally talented, which I had a chance to work with a few. They wouldn't. So practice, practice, practice. Now we're getting into the advanced stuff. Attend the speech and note crowd reaction as well as positive speech moments and areas that can be improved for next time. Now, at Toyota, one of the key teachings is continuous improvement. There's no best, there's always better. So one of the things I would do, particularly with speakers that want to get better, is I would note things, and I would send them a little note, an email, what it happened to be, and I'd say, here's what really went well in this speech, and you put plenty of that in there, and here's things we could work on for next time, which was pretty bold, and I thought, one of these days, one of these executives is going to fire me for being so bold. But every time that I did that, I would get a nice note back from them, and they would say, thank you, I really appreciate it, and we are going to work on that stuff next time. So if you have somebody that wants to be a good speaker and wants to constantly improve, help them do that. Give them constructive. Now, you really got to be careful with that. You tactful. But tell them on how they can do a better job, and they will do a better job. The next thing is measurements where you can, measure results where you can, crowd reaction, event share interview, simple surveys. It's difficult in a speech because generally somebody makes a speech and people get up and go to coffee or whatever they're going to go do. But sometimes you can do, if you have email addresses, for instance, of a group, you can send out a simple survey. You can put a survey at the back of the room, that kind of thing. And 9, repurpose. This is really the holy grail. A lot of work goes into creating a good speech. So you don't want to waste that good work. So where you can, turn it into editorials or columns or send something to customers. Find some kind of an outlet for that information because it's generally valuable information. That leads us to the last one, which is what to include in a speech pitch. And it's pretty straightforward. Number 1, research the media outlet's audience and find something relevant to say to that audience. I hate to sound like a broken record, WIIFM. You know, probably this is the biggest mistake on any pitch that any of us makes. We don't really understand the person we're pitching's audience. We need to understand that audience. And I'm suggesting that even though it's a lot of work, I'm suggesting that you do that research and then you draft a strategy sheet. Why do you draft a strategy sheet even for a pitch? Because it will help you to understand what product you have to sell, right? You will understand yourself why this speaker would be appealing and why it's important for that group to listen to your speaker. So strategy sheet, and then write a 1 to 300 word pitch and attach, if you have it, a brief bio of a speaker, and I'm talking about 4 or 5 sentences, maybe 2 graphs at most. A nice picture if they have it, which would be part of the thing. And then if you have that, brief positive result quotes from other event chairs, if this person speaks a lot, right? So if you, hey, they were a fabulous speaker, they were the best of the conference, whatever it happens to be. Now, why 100 to 300 words? And we're all writers, right? It's much harder to write shorter than longer. Let's be honest, it's really tough. The point is that the average reading speed of an adult now is 100 to 300 words. If you think your pitch is going to get more than a minute of somebody's time, you're sadly mistaken. So you better do your homework, you better do your strategy sheet, and you better capture their attention in that minute or you're going to lose them. You want me to tell you what's even scarier? Guess what Microsoft did a study not long ago. Guess what the average attention span of an adult is these days? How long do you think it is? Let me give you a hint. It's in seconds, not minutes. Seconds, 10. 10, that's a good guess. Anybody else? 3 seconds. Huh? 3 seconds. 3, okay, that's a little severe. All right, so it's in between, it's 8 seconds. But guess what? They also studied goldfish. A goldfish has a 9-second attention span. So we now live in an era where a human attention span is less than a goldfish. Congratulations. So time is always of the essence. I kid about that, but that's a very important thing to remember. There's a couple of bonus pages in there. One of the things people are writing speeches, they say starting is half done. People sometimes have a hard time finding out a good introduction, a good opening to a speech. So here's 20 ideas. You can test those out if you need to do that. And the last one's good sources of information. How to get in touch with me, and I'm glad to help out if you ever have any questions or if you want some of these electronic docs. How to get the Walton book. Ann Wiley, and another great speech coach on the East Coast by the name of Joan Detz. And then I didn't talk about PowerPoint. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint, but it seems to be a corporate need now. If you're going to do PowerPoint, get that book and see how Apple and Steve Jobs uses PowerPoint, because they're the best in the business at doing it. And if you're going to use PowerPoint, try to do that if you can. Okay? That's a very quick tour of how to on speech writing. It's a wonderful, interesting, challenging, and as I say, lucrative, and I mean lucrative part because not many people do it, of public relations. And my hope is that someday you get a chance to experience it. If you do, take some of these things to heart, and I think you'll be further along than somebody that hasn't really studied how to do speech writing. So with that, I want to make sure I leave time for question and answer because I think that's always a fascinating time. So. Thank you, good luck, and I will answer any questions with the time we have remaining. I'm also going to hang around a few minutes, so if you want to talk to me one-on-one or if we didn't get to your question, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. So with that, we got a question. Thank you. Thank you. Yes?
Okay, what do you consider your best sources of information about the company
Okay, the company you're writing the speech, it depends on the size of the company, but there's always, in any company of a large size, there's a historian somewhere. So I try to find out who the historian is. Toyota was very fortunate that the Japanese side very much into history, museums, and that kind of thing. So I had that. And actually one of my first assignments at Toyota was to write a book about the 40th anniversary. So I worked with an author and I did a lot of personal research, a lot of interviews, so I had that. But basically, you know, you can do the Google search and stuff, but I will tell you that you can probably find somebody in the company that's been there the longest. Try to go have lunch with them, try to go have coffee with them, because they are going to give you what's not written in the books, right? They're going to give you the real skivvy on what's going on. And it's fascinating. Every company has an interesting story to tell. And not only are you going to get that information, but you're also going to get probably some interesting stories that you might be able to weave into whatever you're doing. So, yes?
How do you convince a client to follow this when they know?
To follow which part?
Follow your strategy to prepare for a speech.
Well, yeah, and that's a problem, because today, and you know, let's be honest, one of the reasons why Donald Trump has been successful is he's not really scripted, right? And people like that because they're tired of the scripting. I think it's very difficult. I think what you have to, there's a couple things you have to do. One is you have to say you're going to be better off knowing where you're going, to have a blueprint. You don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to say anything that could be embarrassing to the company or to yourself. You don't have to script everything. In fact, on the stories, I would write in, tell the story. But then what you do need to do is give them a transition to get back to. So they go off, tell the story, they come back and say, there's a transition there, so they know how to get back into the speech, right? So I think you got to say, this is a great way to do it. It's a way for you not to get into trouble. It's a way for you to be very successful. Let's give it a try. Let's do a pilot project. Just try this one time, and if it doesn't work out, great. But it'll work out. And they'll go, wow, I didn't know I could do that. And again, you got to get them, I think, over the fear of they're going to read a speech, right? They're not going to have to read a speech. And in fact, if they practice it, you could probably just have key words in there. But they've got to practice it, because if they don't practice it, they're going to get in trouble. So, and these days, you can't get in trouble. It's almost offensive, you know. You have to scare them and say, look, if you don't follow something, you may end up in an alley somewhere and not be able to get back and get in a lot of trouble for it. So you don't want to do that. We want to come in, we want to project an image of a company that's got its act together, a person's got its act together, an image of a company that people want to be involved with, right? So, hopefully, yeah.
I found watching this presidential election, which is insane, really interesting from a speechwriting
Yeah.
point of view. And you brought up Donald Trump, and that I was going to ask you this at any time, but what do you think? You've got to be watching this with the same critical eye.
Yeah.
When I watched like Marco Rubio,
Yeah.
would say party Lincoln Reagan, party Lincoln Reagan. I thought, oh, his speechwriter needed to say, okay, get that one to move.
Yeah.
Because you said it like 5 times, and then the audience is slightly more sophisticated.
Yeah.
What do you think when you're looking at these? Who's got a good speechwriter? Who's got a good?
Well, it's hard to tell. You know, and Obama's a great speaker, but you know what bugs me about Obama? Is he uses, well, yeah, but he uses paddles, and he doesn't make a good transition from one paddle to the other. And I worked with an executive at Toyota who was just a natural community. It was great. And he would pick up part of a line here, deliver it in the middle, pick up the next line over here. And I'm telling you, it didn't look like he was using presidential paddles, right? So who has a good speech, right? It's hard to tell, because somebody may write a good line, but a speaker may flub it, right? So it's hard to tell sometimes how organized, and especially in debates, because those are free-for-alls. You can't really know what's going on. But I think what the whole Trump experience is a lot of frustration with the way we've done things for a long time. And Trump seems to break through that. He does a lot of crazy things. But time and time again, poll after poll that I read, people that you would think would never be Trump people are Trump people, because they're just sick of the sort of scripted, politically correct, never make a mistake, all that kind of stuff that we've had fed to us for a long time. So I think that we're seeing a major change in the political scene right now in terms of the kinds of people that we want to run the country. We want somebody who's a little bit of a rebel. We want somebody that'll shake things up. We want somebody who won't say necessarily the politically correct thing, but the thing that we may think needs to be said. So it's an interesting time, and I don't know where we're going with this.
You know, what this means for the script writers.
Well, yeah, and you know, actually,
He obviously has.
we didn't think he does. Trump does have a speechwriter. Yeah, and he recently, it was a convention, and it was a pretty important, I want to say a veterans convention, and it was the New York Times that somebody did a story on it, and they said, you know, he can follow a speech, and he can be pretty good at it. Now, I didn't see it, but, well, and you know, if you're writing a speech for Trump, you're not going to write every word. You're going to give him thought processes, right? And, you know, obviously it'd be great to be a Trump speechwriter because you don't care if he gets in trouble because he's going to get into trouble. So you don't have to worry about that. But it's sort of the spontaneity. It's the fact that I'm not controlled by anybody. It's the fact that I'm my own person. It's sort of the authentic aspect of it that I think appeals to people. I don't know. So we may be seeing a major change, but I will tell you that people do gravitate to people that are just like them. So the more your speaker can make a connection and come across as somebody human, that's why, you know, pets and animals, the editor's best friends. If you talk about animals or kids, you know, and lots of times at the beginning of a speech, a speaker will do that. They'll talk about their dog or their cat or their kids or what they're going through with their teenagers or whatever. And anybody in the audience that has a pet or an animal or a child gets what's going on. They go, oh, I like this person because they know what I'm going through, right? So it's important to make that, and I don't know if Trump's doing that or not, but I think people are just, you know, liking the fact he's thumbing his nose at the establishment and getting by with it. So, yeah.
So we're starting a study on saying sorry, apologizing from a public relations standpoint. And
Yeah.
just like your take on like how does the speech change, or what are some kind of key lessons that you would coach a speaker if they had to apologize
Yeah.
about something?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you got to get out there and you got to be very clear about it, and you need to do that right up front. Say, you know, first thing I want to do is I want to apologize. I'm sorry. You know, I made a mistake, because the American people will forgive almost anything if you're truly apologetic, if you're truly remorseful. But if you're not, if you come across as arrogant, it won't work. They'll see right through it. So you have to be very sincere about that, and then you got to talk about how you're going to fix it, right? What are you going to do so it doesn't happen again? If you do those two things, and it's a sincere apology, and say, here's what I'm doing so it personally won't happen, you know, I'm getting help, I'm doing whatever, then I think you'll be far ahead. And keep it short. I mean, apology, the interesting thing about apologies is once somebody sincerely apologizes, where do you go from there? Do you keep arguing? No, it sort of takes the wind out of your sails. So you can't batter them anymore because they've agreed that they've screwed up, right? So be very sincere, talk about how things are going to get better in the future, and move on. That's about all you can do, I think. Yeah.
Have you had challenges, like if the spokesman for the company is not a good speaker? What do you do? Do they have to have extra coaching? Or, 'cause I have
Yeah.
clients that really are not really good interviews, and it's been a bit of a challenge. It doesn't come across.
Yeah.
I was wondering how you deal with that.
Yeah, it's difficult. Most of my challenges, at least at Toyota, were with the Japanese speakers because they don't understand. There's so many nuances in the English language that Japanese are very literal when they translate. And so sometimes I would get speeches that they were delivering in English and they've translated from Japanese, and it's really screwy. And so I had no idea where they're going, so I said, I think this is what they meant to say. And I'd send it back and they go, oh yeah, run son. Yeah, it's perfect. So, but basically, all you can do is sort of meet with them face to face and say, here's what's good and here's what's bad, and you want to be the best you can be. You know, you need to build them up, and you say, I will be with you every step of the way. Here's what we're going to do. If you practice, if you do the things that we're talking about, you will come across well. And it's amazing when they do that, and they would do these dealer meetings and like Hollywood shows, and there's like 3,000 Toyota dealers out there, and they get on the stage and it's lights and it's, you know, in Vegas and all that whole thing. And they'll deliver a really good speech, and then they see you afterwards, they want to hug you. Now, they don't, but they want to hug you because it's exactly what you said was going to happen because they did what they said. So, and sometimes you can't. You know, sometimes there's just people you can't get to, and you just maybe send them a follow-up note and said, here's what I recommend, and you know, if you want to get better, this is what you do. If you don't, then that's fine. And we would look for, in Toyota, I would look for people that were coming up that would be leaders of the future. I try to get them. We actually brought in Mark to do some seminars with up-and-coming men and women leaders in Toyota because they were hungry. They wanted to be good so that they could advance, right? And those, so lots of times you have to work with the ones that really want it, you know, and you know, in the corporate world, almost anybody that's going to make a speech wants help. So you've got a little bit of an advantage from that standpoint. So, anything else? One more?
One more comment. I don't know if you've been following Mitsubishi internationally. They've just been nabbed for faking their miles per gallon. Here's what you may not have heard in the last 24 hours. They did the same thing 40 years ago. Now, how would you like to be that PR company? Not get them out of one, but a history of faking the data.
Yeah, it's going to cost them. It's going to cost them a lot. So, yeah, it's not fun. And Japan, what you have to do is you have to bow very low for a long time in front of the news media. It's really, so at least they don't come by and slice your head off with a sword. But basically, that's what you do in Japan. To apologize, you go before the world and you bow very deeply for a long period of time to show that, you know, you were wrong and you regret it. So it's interesting thing for the Japanese. Here, you run for office. Thank you.